Justin Trudeau has finally, 66 days into this conflict, expressed support for a ceasefire, bringing this incredibly cringe clip to its inevitable conclusion.
We need to see a cease. We need to see a humanitarian pause so we can flow. We need to see ceasing of the levels of violence that we're seeing.
He voiced the support in a statement which he wrote alongside the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand. The word ceasefire doesn't appear until 6 paragraphs into the statement. Right after mentioning the previous humanitarian pause, it goes on to say, quote, "We want to see this pause resumed and support urgent international efforts towards a sustainable ceasefire." The overall statement, which you can read in its entirety on the Prime Minister's website, comes across as incredibly careful and really timid when it comes to the atrocities in Gaza. The statement begins by saying, quote, "Australia, Canada, and New Zealand mourn every Israeli and Palestinian innocent life which has been lost in this conflict and express our condolences to all families and communities affected by the violence." It then unequivocally condemns Hamas's October 7th attacks and the, quote, "appalling loss of life," quote, "heinous acts of violence," and, quote, "sexual violence." Then, 3 paragraphs in, and before mentioning the word ceasefire, it says they recognize Israel's, quote, "right to defend itself." However, quote, "in defending itself, Israel must respect international humanitarian law. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected." Quote, "We are alarmed at the diminishing safe space for civilians in Gaza. The price of defeating Hamas cannot be the continuous suffering of all Palestinian civilians." This is as close as the statement gets to condemning Israel's violence against Palestinian civilians, which an Israeli study found make up 61% of the deaths in Gaza from airstrikes. The statement itself often uses passive language when talking about these civilians. And when touching on some of the terrible things happening to Palestinians, it at no point mentions Israel's role. Like this paragraph, which mentions several things the Israeli government is responsible for and does not mention Israel once. The statement goes on to voice support for a 2-state solution and expresses concern about the conflict spilling out across the region. The Prime Ministers conclude by rightfully condemning rising anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Arab sentiment at home and abroad. What do you think of this statement? Does it go far enough? Does it go too far? I'd love to hear what you think.